Hello everybody, it's George from Ireland. Here I am in the South African Jewish Museum in a converted synagogue, and there you see the ark where the Torah scrolls will be kept. Then up high there's a gallery where women would sit, women and men physically separated in conservative and Orthodox synagogues, not in modern, in liberal or reform ones. So I heard services go on for like 3 hours, and chatting and being inattentive was entirely acceptable. So I'm not sure when Jews first came to South Africa, but about 1862 they built the first synagogue just down the street from here, beside the South African Parliament. It's demolished now, and this one was built soon afterwards. But this place is a museum. There's a more modern synagogue, just a few steps from here in the same compound. Look at the Hanukkah, okay, special menorahs. That's the sort of festival of light around Christmas time, when they came back to Jerusalem after the exile, and when it was at Babylonia, they had enough oil for 1 day of candlelight, but miraculously it burned for 9, and so on. Look at the prayer shawls, the special ram's horn for blowing on New Year, and so on. Okay, and the scrolls, handwritten, so any mistake in the name of God, the whole thing has to be scrapped. More minor mistakes, less of it has to be scrapped. So handwritten, okay. And all these gold and silver candlesticks and so forth. So various bits of Jewish paraphernalia. The mezuzah, where some Torah scrolls are put in that on the doorpost for adults to touch coming in and out of the house, or even each room. Kippah, to remind them of the presence of God, certainly within the synagogue. Some Jews wear them all the time. Brit Milah set for circumcision, the less said the better, and so on. Okay, so talit, special aprons, tefillin, these little leather boxes with scrolls of the law, binding them to your forehead and to your forearm when you're praying, and so on. The yad, that's a sort of like reading stick for touching the sacred scrolls, so you can tell where you are in your reading passage. Don't touch it with your hands lest you soil it, and so forth. The breastplate put on the Torah scrolls. The Torah scrolls got images of lions and the crown quite often, but otherwise they have no images of animals or humans in the synagogue, lest that be idolatry. So there we go. So at one point here in Cape Town, Jews were 5% of the city's population. They're much fewer than that now. Part of the end of apartheid, fortunately, everybody can live where they like. So a lot more black people in the city, and more Jews have emigrated to Israel and elsewhere. But the Jewish community, more so than any section of the white community, was anti-apartheid. Partly victims of racialism themselves. They felt they couldn't acquiesce in racialism. Now, of course, some Jews said, please, come on, don't do this. We're sort of on sufferance here. A lot of the whites are anti-Semitic. Let's not make it even worse. But other Jews said, despite the risk to ourselves, we've got to speak up for our black sisters and brothers. So, yeah, I mean, of the whites who were anti-apartheid activists, a huge percentage were Jewish, despite Jews being a small percentage of the overall white community. So, Cape Town, 1795, that's when the United Kingdom took it over from the Netherlands, and the Netherlands recognised that some peace treaty of 1814. So here we are in the more modern part of the synagogue. So many South African Jews, they trace their origins to Lithuania and Latvia, form parts of the Russian Empire, and the Pale settlement were allowed to settle. So in 1814, that's when the Jewish community set up a place of worship, but it's actually in a private house. They didn't have a purpose-built synagogue until 1863. The garden, not very far from here. They're trying to show you what it would have been like in one of these houses with that film in there. Try to recreate a bit of the shtetl, as in the village you'd have in Eastern Europe, where so many South African Jews trace their origins back to Lithuania and so on. So tend to prosper in business and the professions. So the Jewish community in South Africa overwhelmingly live in Cape Town or Johannesburg. A South African Jewish friend told me people jockyly called Johannesburg Jewburg. But there's not a very large community there anymore. What else can I say? The Rivonia treason trial in 1962, when Nelson Mandela and his comrades were charged with high treason against South Africa, their white co-defendants were all Jewish. Dennis Goldberg amongst them received life sentences. I thought he may well get a death sentence. His mother didn't hear the sentence, and he said, life is wonderful. Well, a life sentence is not wonderful, but it could have been worse. He could have been executed. So images of how Johannesburg evolved, because till the 1880s it was just empty space. Then they found diamonds as a bit of a Klondike moment when people rushed in to claim diamonds and other and gold, other precious metals, non-precious metals, got incredibly rich mineral deposits. And so that's why Johannesburg expanded incredibly fast. It's named after Johannes. Which Johannes is unclear. So the Jews soon prospered. They eventually set up their own country club and social club, the King David, here in Cape Town. They said partly because the Afrikaner or British-dominated ones wouldn't always let them in, just because of sheer anti-Semitism. So there were Jewish schools and Zionist organizations and so on. So there we go. And Jews coming from other parts of Africa, such as Zimbabwe, then Rhodesia, often moved to South Africa. But there was some alarm about immigration amongst the white community, despite them all being immigrants from Europe themselves. And obviously Jews were fleeing Germany after 1933, some of them coming to South Africa. Now this is what Nelson Rolihlahla Mandela wrote about them. You see there in his Long Walk to Freedom autobiography. In my experience, I've found Jews to be more broad-minded than most whites in the issue of race and politics, perhaps because they themselves have historically been victims of prejudice, and so it goes on. So I warmly recommend this to you. It's quite interactive, well presented, lots of displays, films, airy, good air conditioning, a little cafe and so on. But obviously apartheid South Africa had a cordial relationship with Israel at the time, and Israel said, we've got our backs to the wall, we've got to cooperate with anyone who's willing to help us. And so that they helped the South African apartheid government set up its nuclear weapons program. Anyway, I probably won't show you everything, that's maybe enough, but Jewish people have contributed so much to South Africa in so many different walks of life, academia, law, medicine, enterprise, and so forth. Joe Slovo, the first Minister for Housing under the Democratic government, was a Jewish person, one of the very few whites to be very high up in the ANC. The African National Congress, to this day the governing party of South Africa. All right, thank you for watching my video. Make sure you subscribe on Patreon, donate to PayPal, georgecallahan79@gmail.com. Okay, toodaloo everyone.